Hello, I'm Jacob, and this is the Prepper's Bunker Outdoors. Today, we're going to talk about the Kabar MkII fighting knife. USMC fighting knife, Army fighting knife, whatever, we got the USMC model here. Specifically, what we're going to talk about is whether or not this would make a good knife, or it would be a prudent decision to choose this knife as your survival knife. Now, this is part of a series. We talked a little bit about the history of the blade, and we talked about whether or not it could be used as a bushcraft knife. A bushcraft knife is very different from a survival knife, and for that task, although I would do some modifications to this knife, it'll do bushcrafty stuff just fine. Now, what you need to understand for this video is what a survival knife is. So a lot of people think of survival as I'm going to live the rest of my life in the woods. And if you, in your mind, go by that definition, you're not going to be doing it with one knife. You're going to go with all of the tools that you feel are appropriate. If you find yourself in a real survival situation, it's because you've done something wrong, you've gotten lost, you've gotten injured, and in that scenario, it's much more likely for you to only have one blade because lots of people walk around with only one blade, and whatever blade that is now your survival knife. So if you are trying to decide what knife you're going to take with you when you go out, that could end up being your survival knife. Is this knife a good choice? Before we get too far into that, this channel is completely funded through sales at my website, beachandtactical.com, where I make survival and tactical gear. Also, I do have a Patreon where you can support the channel directly, and I'm a brand ambassador for Gruntstyle, where you can get premium patriotic apparel with a lifetime guarantee. I'm actually also here with Justin, who's sneaking off right now. Justin Vidito. And so what we're going to do is we are going to put this knife through a series of tasks that you could find yourself using a knife in a survival situation, or tasks that could accurately depict the type of stresses that this knife could go through in your real life 3-day survival situation, where coming home with a knife is much less important than coming home alive. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a baton. Since I'll be using a baton quite a bit in this video, it makes sense that that would be one of the first tasks that I look to accomplish today. So stick around and I'm going to get to work. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use this Field Expedient baton to try and make a nice baton. The reason being that we're going to be doing cross-grain batoning, carving, and with grain batoning all in one task on this dead hemlock, which should be a very easy wood to work with. So I don't foresee us, hopefully, having any issues with this. But it gives us a good range of tasks to get started that could possibly represent similar to the things that you would do in your little 3-day survival deal, if you were to find yourself in one. The other thing is that cross-grain batoning makes a lot more sense in a survival situation if you don't have a decent-sized knife or an axe, which people always say an axe is better. Well, if you're going out on your little walking trip and you're not carrying an axe, guess what? When you have your emergency, that little option that you like talking about so much online ain't going to be there for you. And then you're going to be a knife guy. All right, so we used the K-bar. We made a nice baton. Is making a baton a survival task? No, it's really a bushcrafting task. I like to do it because I like to use a baton so much that if I was in a survival situation, it might make me feel better just knowing that I have one and I'd used a lot. But the reason that I did this first is I'm going to be using this baton a lot to test this knife, but also this hemlock, it's not very hard. We did cross grain batoning. We did all of these tasks already with this knife, and they are tasks that could represent the stresses that this knife would go through in a survival situation. So did I choose this test first because it's the most pertinent to survival? No, I chose it because I'm going to need to use this, and it is going to put stress on the blade that the blade could experience in a survival situation. So far, it's holding up fine. So now we're going to ramp up the amount of stress that we put on this blade incrementally until we find what its point of failure is. The purpose is that if you're thinking about buying this knife for a survival knife, you might become better educated and you might have a better understanding of what the knife is capable of, which in a survival situation, knowing what your knife can handle could be hugely beneficial. Or on the other end of the spectrum, if you already use this knife and you've told yourself that this is your survival knife, now you might know a little bit more about it, seeing when it fails and what your knife could do for you. So let's go smash on some stuff and pick up the pace on the abuse. The next step for us is going to be cross grain batoning through this tree here. It's a maple, not a super hard wood in comparison to oak or even locust, but it should be, first off, it's pretty straight. It would make a wonderful ridge pole if you were to go make a shelter. And so bringing something like this down would be awfully nice. Now, if you had an axe or a saw, this would be so easy that it would be nothing. But we're doing our little survival situation here, so we're going to do it with the K-bar. See how it goes. See, where can we see? By here? Yeah. Crap, it's hot. Oh, this stuff is soft. So the only use that this knife has seen is what I have already showed you guys. So it's going to be hard to show, but either the blade or the tang, I think it's the blade though, is already bent to the left, which is actually surprising to me because we've hardly done anything with this knife. I mean, if we were out here with an Essie, honestly, this would be not a survival trip. This would be a regular day out with the Essie. And I think we're already pushing the limits of the K-bar. So, you know, when it comes to making a baton and getting a ridge pole for a shelter, it's already hurting, guys. The next thing that we're going to do is a tip test. Now, we see a lot of tip tests on YouTube, and I feel like we're not often given a lot of reasoning or I don't know, realistic application. But you have to think a survival knife, the knife that you're carrying, you might not necessarily be in the woods. You might be in an urban environment. You might be prying your way out of a car. You might be breaking into a door, breaking out of a door, all manner of things. And a bit of strength goes a long way. On the flip side of that, a lot of people look for ultra tough tips, and you lose the practicality of the knife being a knife when it becomes a crowbar. So there's a fine balance between what's an acceptable tip and what's overbuilt. And So it is something that could certainly be very important for a survival knife. And with a fighting knife in particular, it's a special balance, because do you want to stab or do you want to pry? All right, because if you've got a nice tip for stabbing, it makes it difficult for it to also be a nice tip for any kind of other stuff. I think the other thing that people don't understand is, if you're in a survival situation, the last thing you care about is probably your knife tip, or if your knife comes home at all. The important thing is you coming home. So, although losing a tip is a problem because it's a useful part of the tool that you need, you just, whatever your concept of the tip is for, is it going to be strong enough for that? In a survival situation, you don't know. So we've got some good deflection there. Let's go into the side here. Justin mentioned if he's skinning some game or something like that, is he gonna hit a bone or something like that and lose his tip? So it's an important thing to check out. Now I would say, with how thin this tip is, already I would say that heat treat's got to be pretty good, because we're not having serious issues. And we're doing some pretty good prying here. Prying this little maple all into pieces. Heck, we might even straighten this knife out. So, let's take a look. Here's our tip. All right. We've lost some finish. Nobody cares. Tip is still awful pointy. Yeah, it's still bent off to the left from our last exercise, but it doesn't seem to be bent further. Still usable. It was specifically requested to me that we test the pommel. Now, smashing something with a pommel is not something that I've ever found myself doing, but I'm sure that there's instances where it makes sense. And the pommel being pinned into the tang, if your pommel fails, your handle fails. So that's kind of an important thing to look at if you do need to use your pommel to smash stuff. The sandstone is not super hard. This could be a safety glasses area. Sandstone is not super hard. It will crumble. I mean, what else do you need to smash? I don't know. Justin, if you had to smash something, what would it be?
Probably somebody's face.
Yeah, well, that's pretty soft.
Yeah, some people have pretty hard heads.
Yeah. That's accurate.
No, I think in the survival application, maybe if you came across some nuts or something like that, but there, by the same token, you could probably find a rock to do that for you.
That makes way more sense.
So I think the applications would probably be limited.
But regardless, having it be strong is important, because like I said, if you lose this pommel that's pinned in, you lose your handle.
Right, absolutely.
So if you are ended up doing something, you bang your pommel, it comes loose.
Right.
You've lost the... Now I'm just... All right, so see here where I've been bashing it. It's pinned.
Still tight.
And it's still tight. So for anybody who's wondering about the strength of the pommel, for any realistic task, I'm going to have to say it's fine. Now, maybe over the long term, if the handle starts shrinking or some other things, maybe it'd get messed up. But yeah, survival pommel, sure.
Okay, so I've done this a lot in my personal experience, just not paying attention. So the next test we're going to do is we're going to be chopping, but we're going to kind of glance off and hit this rock. We're doing it intentional, obviously, in this test, just to see how much damage it does to the edge of the blade. But the reason for it is, like I said, I have done this quite a bit on accident. Or it slipped into the ground and there was a rock there that I didn't see before. Not necessarily I'm intentionally going to try to chop a rock in half, but that kind of stuff does happen. So the heat treat on the edge will have huge disparities between knife to knife as to whether it's going to chip or it's going to bend over or break the knife in half, or a whole multitude of things. So that's kind of what the next test is going to be. So I'll do a glancing blow and then it'll hit down onto the rock.
Real quick, the most likely time to make a mistake like this
So when you're tired
is when you're tired and hungry and stressed.
Right, exactly.
So I've even done this on accident and have knives come out all right.
Oh yeah.
Just fine, just being foolish or not paying attention.
Right.
But when you're really hungry, this almost, unless you're really careful, this almost becomes like a reality.
Right,
I mean,
absolutely. And then depending on what actually happens to the edge when that happens,
can it sharpen out?
Or? We got to see if, can we resharpen it with just, a smooth rock? Or is it going to chip the blade so bad that, it's going to be unsharpenable? And now this one utensil I have to survive with is pretty much worthless. So we will give it a shot. Oh, we got a spark. And this is
sandstone, so it's soft.
So it's actually, believe it or not, it's chopping into the sandstone. And we actually got a little bit of a spark. So right now, obviously I've got, it's a little bit duller, you can tell. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. You've got a little bit differential spots that have obviously taken some damage, but I don't see any stress fractures, chipping, anything like that. I think this is the same stuff. So we might try that with a little bit of a harder rock, because like I said, this stuff is actually, believe it or not, cutting. But in all actuality, for what I'm doing, banging a knife edge on a rock, it's having some pretty good edge retention, which is a little surprising.
I think that the Kabar quality is actually very good.
Right. And I would not have expected that. I figured it would have chipped or break or something like that. But let's see if we can find. So this is a little bit of a harder rock. I'm going to do away with the glancing and just kind of hit it a couple times, you can see it's making marks in it. And I'm not getting crazy with it yet. But yeah, same thing. You know, it's obviously dulling the blade, but you know, no huge chips or cracks or anything like that. And then one thing I am really a big proponent of as far as a survival knife, and I know there's a lot of schools of thought on this and a lot of different mentalities, but for me, if I'm going to have one knife to trust my life with, I would rather that knife bend instead of break, and I would rather that I had to sharpen it every so often and it was easy to sharpen rather than necessarily maintaining this crazy edge for a really long time, but it's a literal impossibility to be able to sharpen in the field. So if I have this knife and, you know, this one as actually, and that's why I was kind of scraping it on the rock to see if it was making any wear marks, which it is, meaning that if I found the right kind of stone, I could actually probably get a halfway decent edge back on this thing with just a simple stone. And, you know, I'm not going to have to sit there with a bench grinder or anything crazy in order to be able to get a cutting edge, you know, to be able to do just average tasks with it. So I personally like that part about it, is that the edge retention is holding up pretty well, but it also would be able to halfway easily sharpen, you know, out in the wild if you had to. And if you didn't have, you know, pre-manufactured sharpening devices, such as a whetstone or whatever, if you just had, you know, a rock. So, yeah, Bear thinks so too. So we'll kind of go on to the next thing. Okay, so this is the test that you've all been waiting for. The only one in the history of the world, I think, that do this test, and for probably good reason, is me and Jacob. But as we explained when we did it with the junglist, and we're going to talk about it probably a little bit later, but you never know what type of situation you're going to find yourself in, or what you're going to have to do with your equipment in an actual survival situation. That's part of the whole ordeal, is that you're having to use things that are not what they are designed to do. So what we're going to do with this is kind of replicate one of those instances in which maybe, you know, I have a flash flood that's coming on. I got to get out of this this little canyon that I've put myself in because I was an idiot in the first place. So I don't necessarily have a good handhold, you know, to be able to lift myself up and climb up. So I've jammed the knife in there to be able to use that as a little bit of extra leverage to get myself up. So we're going to see if this K-bar can hold up to that kind of stress, or if it's just going to snap in half or bend. So I'm going to try. You might want to, can you back up a little bit? So I'm going to have my other hand on here just kind of for stability's sake. So we're going to see if it can take kind of my whole weight. And I know you can't see that I'm doing it, but I'm putting a lot of my weight on my left hand, which is on the K-bar. And it is literally no worse for wear. I mean, it's got some scratches on it, but it's not bent any more than it was. So we are going to go the full route. I don't know if I can actually do this. It might slip out because of the angle of the rock. But I'm placing a lot of stress on it right now, and it still came true, relatively speaking. So that's pretty impressive from what I imagined would happen. What I had kind of imagined would happen with this is that it would just snap right in half, or it would bend, you know, like a pretzel. I guess pretzels are, you know what I mean. But it didn't. So maybe this is a, I don't know if you can see kind of how much that's bending. I think this is done it right here. So now we've got, there we go. So what I did differently was I put a little bit more pressure out here on the end of the grip, or the end of the handle, and as you can see, it is bent significantly. So what that tells us is that the weak point is, as we were talking about earlier, inside the handle. It's in the tang, and that is what's bending, as opposed to the blade bending or breaking. However, what I said earlier is that I would much rather have a knife that bends than breaks. So even though that's not good, and they could probably shore up that tang and produce a much better knife, I was able to just bend it back, and we're back at square one. It didn't break in half, and now I have this blade and a handle in two separate pieces. So that's a good thing. If it's gonna be bad, it might as well be the good kind of bad as opposed to the really bad kind of bad. But yeah, we're still, I don't see any chips or cracks or any stress points on the blade. So we're gonna have to think of something else. Okay, so we're gonna go back to batoning for a little bit. Found this random piece of wood in this cave, so I'm not sure how rotten it is or if it's gonna hit any points. We're just trying to induce a little bit of stress on the blade. Pretty damn soft, but I'm gonna try to go through this stuff.
Yeah.
We'll, I'm gonna do crossways.
We can do that. I keep forgetting I'm going to get a workout anytime we come make videos. should put that other log that we batoned underneath it.
Do what?
Put that log underneath what you were batoning. That would have made your life a lot easier.
Now you fucking tell me. Well, now what?
We can get back to batoning, but real quick, we're going to kind of see how the knife handles vertical shock or shock along its axis. And this is kind of going back to what could be more of an urban survival type test, where you have to bang this knife into something with some depth to get through it. A door, whatever else. Your option is going straight in. So we're going to bang the old girl right on in. And the reason that I think this is a good test is the type of shock that I think it's going to be feeling through this test could happen on the blade through a lot of other different uses as well. All right, so we've got something interesting here. Justin, can you grab the camera? Thank you. All right, check this out, guys. We have turned the handle, the spine, the tang, into a literal S. That's gonna leave a mark. Can you go ahead and take this back for me? Thank you. Set up somewhat here. All right, excuse me, Bear. I'm working here, bud.
Move, Bear. Come here.
So,
Come here.
all right, so at this point, I'm just gonna see about working this thing out. That's just the tang bending. It's not coming out.
Nope.
And then the tree came down by the mighty Kabar.
So if any of you out there are named Arthur and you feel like traveling into Kentucky, there is a K-bar stuck in a tree.
Oh boy, we're about to have permanent failure. Well,
So I asked Jake when he decided to do this test, I was like, how are you going to get the knife out?
you all coming with me if you want to do it. It'll come out. Where'd the handle go?
Somewhere over there.
She's down. All right. Real quick. Part of the problem with this traditional design, and for the record, a lot of people could get to this point without doing the ridiculous stuff that we did. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Part of the problem with this iconic design is this small tang and the 90-degree edge from where the tang or the blade extends out on the guard. And what you can see here, you can see some large grain structure that's pretty large, which would be a heat treat deal, but on the outside of the grain structure. It's ultra fine, which is nice. So they've got a fairly soft center, but a good heat treat on the outer edges. That is a good thing. But I'm gonna work on getting this out. Hopefully, maybe. All right, so the K-bar died, as you know. Here's the problem with my testing. No matter how I do this test, no matter how pertinent the test is to real use, I can never show you what your knife will do after 3, 4, 5 years of regular use. And I can't tell you how many people have taken their trusty K-bars out and they go out one winter on a trip and hear ping, and this is what they get from it. So the tests that we did today are extreme, and you know, whether or not they are directly relevant to whatever it is that you have in mind is actually not all that important, because what I've taken from this test, for one, is that I think that K-bar's quality is excellent. I think the steel is very tough. I think that if you chose this knife to take out with you on your hike, you found yourself in a survival situation, and you understand this knife's limitations, that you could make much worse decisions.
Absolutely.
Now, with that being said,
And also make much better decisions.
exactly. We live in a day and age and in a market where you have so many choices that are far superior to this. So the SE Hungles, as you know, would take all of the tests that we did today in stride. You know, like...
Well, we were talking about it a little bit earlier as we were walking, and you know, I think for good reason. When the K-bar first came out, it was a step, you know, in a great direction, and it was a workhorse. I mean, how many wars has that thing been involved in? So in a lot of ways, it's the knife equivalent of the 1911 handgun.
Right.
So you still have some residual fondness for it, which I understand as a historical piece. And at its time, in its heyday, it was probably one of the better options that existed.
Especially for the price and for the military.
Right. And for what it was designed to be used for.
Right.
However, we are now, you know, over 100 years since those things were first designed. You know, so we have come leaps and bounds in technology, in blade technology, in, you know, just, you know, steel, knowing how to heat treat them, design, you know, just a whole plethora of different things. So while if we were to go back in a time machine, yeah, I would probably be carrying a K-bar around, you know, if it was 100 years ago. But nowadays, is it really the best option? So, you know, I think you have to kind of think about it like that. And should I spend that money on this knife, or should I get something better? And what we didn't really talk about was the historical part of it. I would really think long and hard before you take your grandpa, who is no longer with us, you know, you take his old K-bar out,
Yeah.
and start, you know, doing bushcraft stuff with it, or doing, you know, survival type stuff with it, because
It's going to have sentimental value, and if
Right.
it does ping,
you don't want that.
you-
Like, put it in a glass case, tell people stories about it, you know, that kind of stuff. But you know, just because your grandpa may have killed, you know, 50 Nazis with it, it might not have the same wear and tear capabilities nowadays that it once did.
Well, and on that note, your grandpa might have killed 50 Nazis with it, but as a knife is used, you can create stress fractures that you don't see or notice, and you
Absolutely.
can continue to use the knife potentially for years. But then you find yourself in this survival situation, you're doing a fairly simple task, maybe you're doing a cross-grain baton and you're popping a little wedge out, just a very minute task, and ping, there it goes. I think that Kabar's steel is excellent, I think their heat treat is excellent, but
The biggest problem I have is the tang, man.
well, not only just the tang, but also the transition between the tang
Right.
and the blade
Right.
is pretty square, if not completely square, which is a stress riser. It creates problems. So, today's K-bar, or I should say, if the K-bar is the 1911 of the handgun world, then I would say that the Glock of the handgun world would probably be the SE6.
Yeah.
And the SE6 you can carry just like you would carry this K-bar, and it might not have that sex appeal, kind of like the 1911 and the Glock, but it's gonna be a better tool for the job. And I think I mentioned earlier in the video, a survival knife, just like a self-defense firearm, is the one you have on you when you need it. Which would behoove you, if you're going to carry a blade into the woods, make sure beforehand that it would be an acceptable survival knife.
Right.
That's why you make that decision beforehand. But I'd like to.
That's why you do these videos like this. You
Right.
know, and I know some people get kind of up in arms about, you know, this, that, or the other thing. I get it. You know, oh, that test is totally unrealistic, or this or that. But would you rather have Jacob and myself break a knife and say, okay, well, I was going to buy that knife, or I have that knife, but now I probably won't rely on it, or at least I know its limitations and when it's going to probably break? Or would you rather find that out when your life is on the line?
Right.
I would probably rather have somebody else do that for me and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can make an informed decision now. And that's the reason that Jacob does these videos. I think some people, you know, it almost seems like they think that I think we're just trying to like make fun of a brand or something. Like that's not it. Like you know, and we've talked a lot about this, and I don't know how much you put on your YouTube channel, but like this man actually cares about. Maybe to his detriment, but he actually cares about, you know, the people that are watching these videos and them getting actual information, not just, you know, us sitting here and being like, K-bar is the best thing since sliced bread. You should buy one of these right now, and yelling and screaming and, you know, waving flags. But that's not the purpose. The purpose is so you can make an informed decision on what you're wanting to do. If you want to carry a K-bar for your bushcraft survival stuff, go for it. Like we're just trying to help you be more educated as far as the limitations of what you actually have or what you could potentially buy.
And if you already own this knife, one of the important things is if your mentality was, my grandpa carried this knife, this is the best knife ever, K-bar's quality is excellent, which I am impressed with the quality, I am impressed with what this knife did.
Yeah, I was surprised.
And you watch this video and you realize this knife has limitations, and then you find yourself in a survival situation with this knife. If I found myself in a survival situation with this knife, I would be going out of my way to protect this knife,
Right.
because it would be part of my livelihood. And that could be to your detriment, because guess what? If you need to stick your knife into something, or if you really need to get something done, you know, when I met Justin in for the Alone boot camp for season 2, I brought a Nepalese kukri, and it probably wasn't, the one that I brought probably wasn't the best decision, but I'd used it a lot and I trusted it. At one point, we had this task to do, and we were on a time limit, and I was beating the snot out of this knife because, although it wasn't a survival situation, I was like, I have a lot to do, I have 20 minutes to do it, and I was all in. Now imagine if your life is on the line in a similar situation, the tool's value can almost disappear when the task at hand, the importance of it is so high. And
Well, I mean, you said before, you know, outside of the woods type survival. When we talk about survival, we're talking about staying alive in an emergency situation. So, That could be that, you know, you're stuck in your car because you just rolled it off the side of a cliff and the thing's on fire. You know what I mean? And you got to get out of your car, and the only thing you have to pry that door open, I think Jacob said it before, but you know, the only thing you might have to pry that door open, you know, could be your survival knife that that you always carry around with you because you made that conscious decision that, oh, I have to have it with me. So you can bet for sure that more people will find themselves in that type of survival situation, meaning that the likelihood of them dying is exponentially greater than being, you know, stranded in the woods somewhere and having to live for 3 weeks. You know, like those are the real types of survival situations.
On the flip side of that, real quick, if your knife is designed for this kind of abuse, and it has been made essentially into a big heavy pry bar, and you don't carry it into the woods because it's worthless as a knife, you just like to talk about how you would choose it for the apocalypse, but you find yourself in a survival situation and you don't have that pry bar with you because it doesn't work well as a knife and it doesn't carry easily, then it's completely worthless to you.
Right.
So there's a balance point between a knife that works great as a knife but also is built robust, and a knife that is built as a cliche marketing survival knife that's pretty much sucks as a knife. It's big and heavy, and you don't really want to carry it when you go out on that little hike, and then you find yourself in a survival situation and you don't have it. And honestly, you know, this for a realistic survival situation would actually be a really large knife, because most people don't carry, even for a hike or something this size. But if you are going to carry something this size, there's just way better options. And like I said, for me, you know, everybody's going to ask, okay, well, you don't think the K-bar is the best option for today. What do you think is? And, you know, the first thing that's going to come to my mind is the SE6. And with this knife is well made, and it is hindered by the design of the knife. So, you know, if there was a full tang K-bar, which there might be, with more modern handle scales, it might be, you know, the answer if that's what you want. There's some handle geometry problems, but hopefully they would fix that. But yeah, if I was going to tell you what I think today's K-bar would be, what would be a direct replacement for the size and use of a K-bar today? Say an SE6.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm sure there's going to be other stuff that I want to say later, and I'm sure I'll hash it out in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. Make sure to hit Justin up. I'm going to put his Instagram and other information in the description box below as well. I will be taking this home with me. And this place that we're in right now, I will definitely be doing some camping videos here. You'll see I am dressed now. This is air-conditioned camping. We're down by this cave.
Yeah, directly
It's
behind
incredible.
this camera is a cave,
Cave system.
and it's nice and cool down here, even though it's like 90 degrees up on top of the hill. So
It's incredible. So thank you for watching. I look forward to talking to you, and I hope that you have a